Sonia Amini. I'm the Executive Director for the California Virtual Campus. We are a grantee initiative of the State Chancellor's Office, and we support digital technology and course sharing for the entire system with 116 colleges. You came to the best breakout session. I know there were some meeting sessions. But I just want to sort of say it's kind of, the irony does not escape me, because we are talking about teaching and learning, and we're in this really awkward situation where we're like above the audience, and we couldn't even like pass by each other because I wanted to call people up, but I was afraid of like bumping each other off the stage, and then we're like blocking the screen. So these are all things that would occur to us if we were teaching a class, right, in front of our students. So the irony is there, even as we kind of launch into our panel. So I am so excited to introduce our distinguished panelists. These are people I adore and respect and admire, and we are going to hear a little bit about their thoughts on AI in teaching and learning. So I'm going to go into a quick introduction, just so you can see their faces there behind me as well. I've got Melissa Lobo right here. She is our Chief Academic Officer for Instructure. All of the California community colleges currently use Canvas and a number of other Instructure products, as you might know. She oversees thought leadership and academic strategy to drive educational industry advancements, stakeholder partnerships, and company efforts to both influence and respond to legislation in the EdTech space, as well as in advanced employee development. And I will just say she's also ever present. If people need her, if her customers need her, if the colleges need her, she's there, she's available, she's really engaged with our California community colleges. So welcome, Melissa. Here we go. I always tell you to wait to the end, but why wait when you can have posture out, you know? All right, and then next to Melissa, I've got Kristen DeServo, and she is the Chief Learning Officer for Khan Academy. She sets the research-based learning strategy of the experience and leads the content project design and community support teams there. And she didn't add this to her bio, but I want to add it. Just last week, Time Magazine named her as the 100 most influential people for AI in 2024. And then next to Kristen, we've got Zach Pardos. He is an associate professor of education at UC Berkeley, my alma mater. Go Bears.
Go Bears. Go
Studying
Bears.
adaptive learning and AI. His recent work highlighting human-AI collaborations to pave pathways to and between public systems of higher education has been published in various venues, such as at Six Chai. Am I saying that right? I like Chai. All right. Computers in Education and Science. At UC Berkeley, he directs the computational approaches to human learning research lab, teaches in the data science undergraduate program, and is an affiliated faculty in cognitive science. So let's give him a round of applause and welcome him. And next to Zach, we've got Gordon Freeman. He founded the National Laboratory for Education Transformation, that's NLET. Is that the right acronym? NLET. In 2011, and is president and board member. NLET is focused on systemic change in math instruction and in solving the education to employment issues with modern technology. Gordon worked as an investigator on Capitol Hill, a journalist, news and film producer before crossing over to work in K-12 and higher education reform. Let's give him a round of applause. And also we have Ken Sori, who's the executive director of NLET as well. He's a national expert in state data systems and in solving complex institutional barriers to student success and equity, particularly for the California community colleges. And on a side note, Ken is a graduate and transfer student from Foothill Community College. Go Owls! All right, so I'm going to sit here with my panelists as well, because dang it, this podium is already way too high, and I feel tall. All right, so what I would like to do is let each of our panelists talk a little bit about where they are from and what they see as the future of higher education, and sort of get a little bit of an understanding of their background and what they represent. So with that, I will start off by asking Melissa to go first, and I'll give you the clicker. Here you go. So tell us a little bit about Instructure, you know, what your role is, and what you really see Instructure doing for the role of AI in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's lovely. I'll use yours, we'll figure out that.
Okay, there we go. That works. It's so lovely to be here, especially this morning, getting to listen to a wonderful keynote. And an exciting conversation about the positivity and possibilities with AI in higher education. As Marina shared, I'm the Chief Academic Officer for Instructure. I've been at Instructure now 11 years, and have been on a long journey with all of you at the California Community Colleges. You're one of our very first and our very largest customers, and probably many of you are very familiar with Canvas and some of the other solutions that we provide. From an AI perspective, actually from a broader future of higher education perspective, we see a ton of possibilities underneath AI in how we think about aligning to the workforce. And I think some of that came through this morning in the conversations. We also see a ton of possibility in how we can make teaching and learning more efficacious and more engaging for students, all students of all walks of life. From an AI more specific perspective, what was spoken about this morning really resonated with me and resonates strongly with what we believe at Instructure, and that AI use needs to be intentional. I think when we started talking about AI when ChatGPT sort of came out in the mainstream, early 2022, mid 2022, suddenly we all had more direct access to AI, although we've all been using AI for a very long time underneath many technologies. Well, a lot of folks came to us and said, okay, what are you building? Where are your AI tools? What's coming? And we, of course, wanted to understand and think about how fast we can innovate, but we wanted to make sure, again, that innovation was intentional. And as you can see here, we focus on 3 key areas when we think about intentional use. First and foremost, student success. Any use of AI, we firmly believe, should drive better student performance, better student outcomes, better student opportunities. I loved that when it was said this morning about AI should be building opportunities. And that is where that student success component comes from. AI should also give us better insights into how and what we're doing, and it make those insights not only actionable but understandable. How many, we all look at data charts and dashboards and things like that, and it's, what does this mean? How do I use this? How do I interpret this into my practice? We see AI as having opportunities to do just that, help us interpret the world around us so we can improve our practice. And then finally, you'll see educator efficiency. There are a lot, and I say this one third, I think this is the one that's probably the most exciting for folks. We can see it right in front of us. Oh, I can reduce my administrative burden. I can be more efficient in how I use. In fact, so much of what we already do in our practices, we're trying to do that every day. But really, what should be guiding what those practices look like should be that intentional use and the idea around driving student success. But of course, you'll see improved workflows, all sorts of different approaches to try to reduce that administrative burden. The last thing I'll mention is when we think about AI, and I joked about how as soon as it became mainstream, everybody asked us, what are you building? What's your tools? We are building things. But we have a 3-pronged approach, and I think this is also really important as you all leverage technologies, as you all think about your own practices, that it shouldn't just be one-dimensional. For us, it's 3-dimensional. The first one is, yes, we will build some stuff. For those of you in the room that are familiar Canvas users, for example, discussion summaries launched, where you can go in and at any point summarize a particular discussion thread and be able to get a sense of where are the students at in that. I personally love that. I'm in my 27th year of teaching online. Scary. I started when I was 10. And in that, though, those discussion summaries, in fact, they trained some of it on how I was using discussions. But in that, it gives me a real-world opportunity and a real-time opportunity to see where are my students at and how do I apply what I understand in that discussion to where I'm going to take my students next. So we are building things. We're also partnering, and I think this is really important. There are some really great technologies, amazing technologies. We made a big announcement around Conmigo. Amazing work's being done. It's not all on one vendor. We have to come together as a vendor community. I see some other vendors in the room as well. And we need to come together and really move forward AI and how we can all think about how we interoperate using these tools. So we're going to partner. And then the last piece is, I think we need to empower institutions, schools, colleges, educators to build your own things too. The fun part about AI is it's giving us technology in our hands that's more usable. And because of that, we can all be creative in how we think and use AI in our own practices and innovate together. So those are our two approaches and sort of where we're at as a company, and I will pass this along.
Did we get yours to work?
Let's see, I did, licked the right switch. Excellent, thank you. All right. So I never like to assume that everyone knows who Khan Academy is. At Khan Academy, we are an online digital practice and instruction tool. Our mission, we are a nonprofit, is to provide a free world-class education to anyone, anywhere. So we partner pretty well with lots of schools like community colleges who have similar mission-driven work that they are doing. One of the big things that has happened for Khan Academy is that in March of 2023, we launched Khanmigo. But before we were jumping into AI, we were thinking, how do we help improve student learning? And doing the research to be able to show the results of students engaged in practice on Khan Academy. And so what you see here is some graphs for younger kids, not older kids, but for younger kids, looking at how the use of Khan Academy for 30 minutes a week, not a lot, 30 minutes a week, results in greater than expected gains on external standardized assessment scores. So that sounds great. Why do we even need AI? Well, part of the struggle that we see is, in fact, only about 10% of students, so we get about 12 million students a month hitting Khan Academy, which is a lot. Only about 1.2 million of those, so it's about 10%, get to that level of learning that's going to help them see those gains, that 30 minutes a week, that 2 hours a month. So how do we help students who maybe are getting stuck and giving up? How do we help those students who are getting frustrated and are about to throw their laptops out? Can AI help solve some of those problems? So that's what we went into it as. We know if students engage in practice with feedback and scaffolding, they will be able to learn these skills, but how do we get them to do that kind of engagement? So that's where we have started from, and really that idea of student learning as our North Star. So Khanmigo, as we will talk about a little bit more, is really about how do we help students work on the best things for them to work at, the things that are at their level, with the right help and the right scaffolding and getting the right support. I will say, as soon as we started showing some of these tools for teachers, they started asking us if we could build teacher tools. And so we do have free teacher tools on Khan Academy, about 25 different things, from helping to write multiple choice questions to helping to design rubrics, all of those kinds of things. And we are just a couple weeks away from that partnership being launched on Instructure, so you'll be able to have them right in Canvas as well. So that's exciting, but I think the big piece is to think about what are the problems that we want AI to solve and being able to work through from there.
All right. Hi, so I'm Zach. I'm an associate professor in the School of Education at Berkeley and also involved in the data science school that you heard from our dean, Jennifer. And my lab has been focused on research in AI in education since I joined Berkeley in 2013. I want to highlight two projects that we're excited about and have been working on, both involving the California Community College system. And they're related to this question of how AI might shape the future of education, or in what ways. So learning's hard, takes a lot of work to put in, because if you're really learning something deeply, it's changing how you see other things, and that takes time. Students should always expect it to be work, right? You get what you put in, and that will always be true for the foreseeable future until we have implants and who knows what happens after that. But what shouldn't be hard is making your way through the system, right? The bureaucratic barriers that keep some students from advancing, whether it's your transcript being evaluated from high school properly, or you make a transfer from a 2-year school to a 4-year school. The articulation agreements don't always get completely honored. Evaluating whether you're eligible for financial aid. All of these things are kind of the boring administrative side of higher ed, but they do lead to a lower student experience, including helping students parsing degree requirements. These are all ways in which there's bureaucratic and cognitive overhead added to the challenge of students advancing. So one project that we're working on that the Chancellor graciously alluded to during the opening is supporting the Chancellor's Office with AB 1111, which is creating a common course numbering system for all 116 community colleges. This should eventually ease transfer, but there's another piece of legislation associated with that. Now, this is a faculty governance issue, so AI, never going to just solve it by itself, but it can help support and create a kind of candidate clustering. There's billions of possible ways of clustering California community college courses. So the data science approach, we're using historic enrollments and catalog descriptions to create neural network mathematical expressions for the courses, and then cluster them together, and then present that to human faculty committees for feedback, refine those clusters as a way to kind of come up with a rough draft, right? Maybe you ask ChatGPT for a rough draft of an essay, we're coming up with a rough draft of a common course numbering system, and it's not something that was possible earlier. And then lastly, imagine that you could take your prior learning, wherever it happened, and translate that to credit at whatever institution you're entering, right? Maybe we evaluate your transcript and say, you just came from the military, all you need is to master this particular skill in Khan or in another of your system, and then we'll give you credit for that course. So what we've been working on in terms of tutoring is to have generative AI be able to create an intelligent tutoring system lesson. So there's a chatbot approach. What we're trying to do is see how fast we can generate intelligent tutoring systems on the fly. And this means exploring studies on how well you can create questions and how those questions compare to textbook questions, how well we can generate hints and how those hints compare to the more laborious route of creating hints. And then finally, how we can then align content to curriculum, including multilingual curriculum. And we actually use Khan Academy Creative Commons content in order to conduct this study, so thank you for making that content Creative Commons. It helps with science, and I'll pass it on.
Thank you very much. I'm Gordon Friedman from the National Lab for Education Transformation. I want to say Melissa and I worked with Blackboard for years together, and then my now 25-year-old son and I went up to visit a guy named Saab Khan who was working in a closet doing his first programming. And my son is, finishing a PhD in math now. All right, so I had a lot of experience in Washington, D.C. And I spent a lot of time looking at what the NSF did, what DARPA does. And while I was at Blackboard, I had a sneaky secret mission when I went around the world. And that was to look where there is an institute that's going to look at the information age and look at how we conform bureaucracies and release students to be able to have their own agency. So after we sold Blackboard in 2011, I started conversations with the White House and said, we need a human capital laboratory. Why don't we have one? It's all dispersed. And the two things that were important for us is absolute universal learning identity. Okay? Everybody's got an identity in everything else, commerce, social, whatever it is. And learner identity, I go to community college for a semester, I drop out. I take a Microsoft course, I'm in it, I don't have an identity. So learner identity, how we solve that problem. And then in addition to that, that education and training to employment has to become a single system. So those are the things we look at in the lab. And we work in several ways. So, and Pam is our executive director. We work with companies that have developed really interesting technologies but have a really hard time figuring out how to weave themselves through the system and all. So what Ken's going to talk about just-in-time math. We have a contract with the community college system for prerequisite math. And then we're working with two other companies. One of them is called GoEducate. We have a table and material on this. And that connects learners and programs, and it connects the programs through machine learning and AI to the active labor market. Or going the other direction, we take a company or an employer who says, well, where are the courses that line up with what we're doing, or an apprenticeship, and then how do I communicate with an individual? And so GoEducate provides learner identity It provides labor indexing to courses and materials. And then the best production I've had all along is Nucleus. My oldest son, last person in the world I thought who would follow me doing anything, has created a system for taking all kinds of courses and being able to put them into one Canvas learning shell, into one learning record, currently starting out in corrections, but moving into workforce shortly. And then the last thing on here is Chip Course. We have a grant in with ASU and this district with Lee Lambert for something we're calling Chip Force. So when somebody gets out of the military or they're out as a veteran already, they lose that whole notion of having been working on something national, something large. And so getting chips made, getting the semiconductor industry up, and getting veterans to be able to work in it, to us should be like Space Force, because the front line for everybody is going to be AI in these chips. And so in every one of these things, we have AI incorporated. And I will let Ken talk about math and just say, if we can't get math right, a lot of people can't get it properly.
Thank you, Kurt. So I just want to briefly tell you a little bit, I won't tell you more about NLET, but just talk about one of the projects we have going on in the community colleges. I started a long time ago in working with big data, with the RP group, with the Common Assessment Initiative, and worked with tons of faculty about these issues of how do we solve some of these institutional barriers for students. And so after coming back to this work, and with the passage of AB 705 and 1705 that you're probably all keenly aware of, we have an unintended challenge. And on the net, it's a good thing, but the unintended challenge is that our faculty members now have a much wider range of students in front of them that they never saw before. We put them into developmental educational sequences, unless you were a faculty member who taught the developmental education sequences. So we have, a much bigger challenge, and it can be very frustrating for faculty, and we haven't really invested enough in the tools and the training and support for faculty to be able to handle this change. So one of the things that we had was a pretty sophisticated, competency-based education platform that we've adapted specifically for math. And it's pretty simple. Basically, it's a way to allow for students to go through short cycle formative assessments, 5 questions on a very specific skill that roll up into these competencies or sort of big learning objectives. And they just take 5 questions. If they do well, they move on. If they don't, it sends us to some online educational resources. So and it's random, so it might be a OpenStax textbook, if it's more than likely a video, math is power for you, something like that. And then they come back. And this is trying to solve those problems where a lot of our community college students struggle with just trying to remember that concept, right? It's not like I didn't know that in the past, I just can't remember, it's been 5 years, 10 years, whatever. So giving them those quick refreshers seems to make a big difference for them to be able to move on. And the neat thing about this platform is that you can barely see it, but these are all of the competencies and micro-competencies that are all linked to that content. Faculty can be very flexible in moving it around and building whatever they want for their course. And oftentimes what we're seeing now is the best application is in co-requisites, because what we do typically in co-requisites, although some faculty are really, really good at it, is that we sort of teach louder in the co-requisite course for the students, right? So very similar content, we just keep running through it. And so what we're trying to do is say, let's look at the prerequisite knowledge that we're no longer teaching in the classes that we would normally have students take. And let's use that as a way to then have students work through some of the skills that are foundational to what they're learning this week or next week. And what it does is then, as students go through it, it lights up a dashboard for the faculty to say, okay, these are my students, red, yellow, green. I can start to see patterns, and I can see where there's a group of students who really struggle with that particular thing. Let's say it's number sense, really simple concept. And I can then pull those aside of my co-requisite and work with them individually or in groups, et cetera. So it gives me a roadmap to kind of do that differentiation that's often very difficult, and we don't know very much about the students and where they are in the math space. Now, what we're doing with all this is building AI tools on top of it. And one of the things that I think is the coolest, because all of this content is very customizable, modular, we can overlay AI onto it to start putting context to the math. So think about work-ready math, like construction math, nursing math, all those things that we typically would teach a student or treat a student in the community colleges with college algebra. Like everybody gets college algebra. Is that really the best application for somebody who wants to be an HVAC technician? So we're trying to really build a contextualization and then build guardrails around what we do with AI within this platform so that it's training on what the student's doing in the platform and not pulling it out of who knows where, so that they really can get feedback on things like, here are some common misconceptions that I'm seeing in your work, or getting faculty sort of roll-up ability to see where those misconceptions are so they can really think about like item analysis and assessments, etc. So we're looking at a lot of things, but the most important thing is that when we're thinking of it on a practical sense for AI is to keep the teacher at the center and not just turn on a shiny new chatbot for the students to interact with. Although we will have some aspects of that, but it's more important to sort of help the teacher be able to we have tools where they can actually control what's out of the ChatGPT. So they'll get, before it's published to the students, they can actually edit it and change it, or they can learn to do better prompting, etc. So these are just ways that we're thinking about some very practical applications in the classroom and for the faculty.
All right, well, I was gonna say with this, go ahead, Gordon. Yeah.
We won't go into detail here, but this is Go Educate, and as you can see, it connects individuals, employers, and courses in the middle that get labor indexed. There's a QR code. If you go to sacramento.goeducate.com, the whole notion of this is to put it in the public sphere. You don't have to be enrolled to use it. If you're enrolled, it might really help you. Last piece on that is the AI side of this, and that's there's a free Go resume. So if you go to goeducate.com for Sacramento, it's a really good resume. You can do several versions of it. And then there's a Go survey. That data then can tell what people are interested in, and then if somebody's in the system, it also will connect with the employers and so forth. So that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Gordon. This was a little bit of like a sampler platter, when it comes to AI. You heard a little bit about the LMS, a little bit about, this amazing tool from Convigo, and then you've heard about some resources and even some research from Zach. So I thought we could kind of dig in and try out some of the goods on the sampler platter, and I'll ask maybe a couple of questions to follow up on what you introduced, starting with Melissa. Melissa, I've heard you talk a lot about intentionality, right? And so when I think about AI, it's sort of the wild, wild west right now in terms of the landscape of how AI is being handled. It's very hard for me to balance intentionality with what's going on in AI. So tell me a little bit about intentionality. How do interoperability play in? How does standards play in? I know these are all important concepts for instruction.
Yeah, so when we think about intentionality, I think a lot of what was discussed this morning too comes into play. First and foremost, tools must be thoughtful in how they are created from both a management perspective, right? So we think about administrating these tools, we think about those of you teaching and using those tools, and they also need to be thoughtful in how students are using them. And I'm going to use the word thoughtful specifically. So they need to understand identity, they need to understand privacy, security, they need to understand how and who is using those tools and why they're using those tools. So I say all of that because there is a lot of stuff we're going to see being built in AI. A lot of stuff, and I'm excited. Innovation is a really great thing. But we need to be thinking about how is it serving its purpose and how is it leveraging a broader ecosystem. So Marina mentioned standards. How are we thinking about leveraging standards and interoperability, or how these tools are working together? Who's passing data where and why? Who's picking up context from where and why? These all become really important questions. And one of the things that I will stress is that we need to be lifting up all of our literacy on AI. This is a great example of it, and I love this. But really understanding and helping everyone understand how to not only leverage AI, but to how to be good consumers of it and know how and where and why your data is being used or your students' data is being used. Last thing I'll mention that Instructure is doing is we're creating what we call AI nutrition facts. And it basically looks like a nutrition label on the back of any kind of good food that you might purchase. And in it, it will detail how AI is being used, and any of the tools that are integrating within our platform will have these nutrition facts so that it can help lift up that literacy.
Can I just say the whole nutrition facts thing plays really well with the sampler metaphor? I'm an English teacher, I love that metaphor.
We got some thinking here.
All right, so I was at InstructureCon, and Sal Khan came to speak during a general session about Convigo. I got so excited. I don't know why, but I ended up like recording most of it on my phone, and I don't know why I did that. They always record it and put it online, but I ended up sending it to my husband, who is a high school math teacher, and I was like, this is going to change your life. So now, Kristen, I know that we've been using Convigo for about a year in various institutions. What have we learned in that time period about how AI is used in the classroom? Tell me more about that.
We are about a year in. We had 53 districts last year using Convigo, and they partnered with us and let us come in and do interviews with teachers and students, do classroom observations, so we could really get a qualitative sense of what was going on. And then we did some quantitative analysis of chat transcripts to see what did those conversations actually look like with students. So first thing, this is not going to be a surprise to anyone. When you give a student the ability to chat with a tutor, they don't magically be able to ask great questions. Like they were struggling to ask questions before, you give them a tutor, oh my gosh, now they ask great questions. Not the case. In fact, what we saw was students still need the same kinds of help with some of those metacognitive skills, thinking about what they know, what they don't know, thinking about helping them understand what they should be focusing on, thinking about how do they understand when they need help. And so we have been doing a number of things now with Convigo to try to make it so that students can understand when should they use it, when might they not use it. But the biggest thing to take away is that for teachers, this is kind of a new skill for students. And so you, I know, have packed agendas of all of the skills you're teaching, but this idea of AI literacy is really important for thinking about if we're asking students to use these tools, giving them the skills that they need to use them. Which then we have AI literacy for teachers and professors. So we also found that for school districts that engaged in professional learning around AI with their teachers, we could see that their classrooms were having deeper use of the tools and were having better interactions in what those look like. So this idea of also how do we think about, for you all here, have a huge cadre of faculty who are interacting with students, how do we help them upskill on AI and what that takes? So a big learning for us was that these tools do take some practice and some work to get to familiar with and to really be able to use effectively. So I think that's an important thing, number one. We certainly heard from students that they appreciated having the assistance when they got stuck, when the teacher wasn't available, when they were able to kind of help them get unstuck with this work. A surprising piece of positive feedback was that students who are English language learners really appreciated being able to talk to Convigo in another language. So Convigo officially supports Spanish and Portuguese, but unofficially, if you talk to it in other languages, it'll talk back to you in those languages. So just having that support, I was confused by what the teacher was saying. I asked in my home language, and now I have a better understanding, was actually something that these models are pretty good at in being able to do some of that language piece and help support English language learners. So those are a couple things that we've learned that maybe were surprising, maybe not, but I think are lessons for all of us.
Now, speaking about tutoring, in a former life, I oversaw a tutoring center that had over 100 tutors on campus. They did online tutoring, they did in-person tutoring, they did study groups. Now, Zachary, I know that you've studied generative AI and kind of the intersection with tutoring. What does that mean for the human capital related to tutoring? How does AI providing tutoring change that, or does it change it?
Yeah, so we set out to kind of automate the creation of an intelligent tutor because it's been a very expensive process, which is why products like Mathia or Alex system of McGraw-Hill are so expensive. And the studies told us a couple things. One is it was focused on college algebra because that's where we've seen the most tutors created, so we could create a baseline to see how we compare to that. The question generation using AI is indistinguishable when measuring using psychometric measurement techniques. things like what's the difficulty of items. So the difficulty of Gen AI created items were indistinguishable from the difficulty of the kind of gold standard textbook. Psychopatricians don't consider textbooks gold standard when it comes to questions, but that's in a second. Then we look to see how much does it cost, or what's the benefit of creating Gen AI hints versus having our content team generate the hints. And we also found indistinguishable learning games. We did a gold standard A/B test, learning game study, again, college algebra. And so in all of these cases, it looks like, hey, we're better off, or we save time having Gen AI create everything, because it took us 1 year to create one Creative Commons adaptive textbook of humans working on this thing. So we want to scale this, we want to be more nimble. So does that mean that I no longer manage a content team, which is between 10 and 15 really bright undergrads who have experience? And the answer is no, we still have a content team. And why? Because we realized that you still need prompts. And we were having, unintentionally, the engineers creating the prompts, right? But we have this domain expert team on hand, on retainer. Why aren't they the ones creating the prompts? And so we've been engineering a kind of domain expert prompt engineering interface tool, which we'll be talking about in research venues later, to retain that expertise and really imbue their expertise into the prompts. Because we're always going to have new questions about how do we prompt using a student's bio? How do we personalize to this or that? We need a new prompt for that. We should have our domain experts doing that. The second way in which it's unintuitive, the way generative AI actually retains labor or puts the focus on humans, even though it has sped up our content development process by 20 times, what that has meant is that grants like a small, relatively small $50,000 micro grant that we got from UC Berkeley to integrate into our mathematics calculus course and chemistry course, and also a tools competition grant that we got to implement, partner with Calbright, the community college system. We can now tailor created content to the instructor's curriculum and to their materials, to create materials that are in the vein of their style, where we get feedback and it's not kind of a one-size-fits-all. So yes, it has decreased the amount of labor created to generate those materials, but it's put teachers at the center, and also we're able to retain domain experts in inserts.
Awesome. I have one more question, a couple more questions for Gordon and Ken, and then I want to save some time for your questions too, because you've got this amazing expertise up here, and I want to give you an opportunity to converse and interact too. So Gordon, I heard you talk a little bit about this concept of identity and agency of the learner. Zach is talking about kind of the role of the tutors or the faculty. Tell me a little bit about, does AI mess that up for us, the agency and the identity, or can AI help us with kind of fostering more agency with the learner? Tell me about that concept of learner agency.
So absolutely. AI, I think, in my mind, and what we're doing in the nonprofit, really has to organize that whole plate of things that learner is interested in, and has to be able to line up their learner identity. And you can imagine, I once asked one of my kids who works in this stuff, I said, could you please go through my email and run scripts on it and tell me who the hell I am? So if you had this working in the background, so if there was a universal identity manager, when I took a course here, took a course here, that catalog would get built, and it would give me that identity. So I think it's critical that we move in that direction. And it's another way to unify all the different things that are happening. The other thing I would say is that, so identity is number one for AI, and make it universal. So nobody's outside, the firewall shouldn't exist between higher ed and the learner out there. And then the other thing for AI and integration is really through all the different solution sets. So in other words, integration of all these tools and services that you buy could actually come down to the individual as the point of integration, as opposed to doing an integration on campus and an integration here. And then finally, the gold standard for all of this is outcomes. So we still can't get outcomes data. And so if in this case with GoEducate, we have learners, programs, and employers in one system, if we can induce those employers in a simple way to say, yep, hire the person, we'll start getting that kind of data. So AI to me centralizes it for the individual. The individual becomes the center of the universe. Integrations move around them. So that's a transformation. Everything else we've been doing is transitional. It's a piece of something that may work better. But if we're going to transist, that's what we have to do. The simple thing that got me into this was Expedia. So I thought, there's a resume, there's a course listing, and there's a job. There are cars, there are hotels, and there are airplanes, and somebody solved that problem a long time ago. We need to solve it now. I'll let Ken answer on this.
Yeah, Ken, tell us more about that concept of agency, and maybe give us a specific example of maybe math or STEM, an area where it can be applied in terms of how that tool could impact the learner agency.
Well, I think math is a tricky one because everybody it's kind of a scatter plot for everybody who enters the math space in our community colleges, and we don't know very much about them. And we no longer really assess them, but we need to figure out where they are so that we can do a better job. I think AI is going to play an important role, not just in sort of the front-facing, shiny new AI tutor chatbot thing, and those are important, and also really interesting. And I think the points were made that students are increasingly going to need to learn how to prompt. It's going to be a field in a sense, and down the road very quickly we'll see AI teaching us to use AI. So better ways to ask questions. I think there was an interesting article out recently about sort of it was from the Learning Agency. I think you probably interact with them a little bit. And it was about Saga Education. And the idea was this concept of hidden AI. So it wasn't that sort of front-facing thing, but it's all the things that could happen in the background that doesn't take away from the human-to-human interaction, which I care deeply about. You mentioned that keeping the teacher at the center or the instructor at the center. We're not trying to replace those folks, but we're trying to help them do a better job of helping students. And so what they focused on was not having the students interact directly with a tutor, an online tutor, but they used the AI to help train their own personal tutors to ask better questions of the students. So the idea was like, how could you lead them down an inquiry path that asked them to think deeper, as opposed to just working with them on the answer. So those are just like different twists on this. I think ultimately will give students more agency, and it's not going to necessarily all be front-facing with a chatbot.
Fabulous. All right, I want to open up for questions. I'm going to walk around with the microphone, and then you all can share these microphones. So, who's got a question? Okay, I see a hand in the back. There I go. I wore my flat shoes today. All right, go ahead.
Hello, this question is for Zach. Do you build your own private GPT in your lab, or you just utilize the OpenAI APIs? And what do you think about open source LLM like that?
Yeah, pretty technical question. So for most of our studies, we used whatever the latest GPT model was, API. For the multilingual alignment, where we're trying to predict the learning objective or skill of arbitrary content and align it to a taxonomy, we tried the latest Llama model there. Now, our finding was that you can improve the Llama model using fine-tuning up to the performance of GPT, but then if you use fine-tuning on GPT, it exceeds Llama. So the open source models still have a ways to go, at least in that particular study. What I think about open source in general is very much support open source. So we had a hypothesis 4 years ago that one of the reasons we haven't seen a lot of innovation in the intelligent tutoring space is there hasn't been an open source platform for an individual student to modify a PhD student, undergrad, hack away at, experiment with. So we spent 3 years developing an open source intelligent tutoring system, opened it to the world, published on it. That's the SIGCHI place, oatutor.io, and that has helped us with our own studies be nimble in developing and deploying studies with open source.
I just have if we go down this road, one of the things that's been a challenge for us, and I think we need the research community, is how do we evaluate these models for education purposes? So we put out a data set that looks specifically at how good model, you can use it to evaluate how good a model is at correctly evaluating the student's work in a conversation. So you imagine you're in a tutoring conversation, the student says something, the model, it's not even the final answer of the math, it's a step in between, and the model needs to either say, hey, great, good job on that step, or it needs to say, oh, you're a little bit off track. How good are the models at doing that specific thing? So we released like 200 little conversation snippets that you can then use to evaluate models to do that little thing. That's one little piece of tutoring on where these are. So we need lots more of ways to think about how do we evaluate open source models, the GPT models, the Claude models, how do we know how good they are? So I think there's a lot more effort needs to be done there.
All right, I've got a question from Jim Julian.
Thanks. I'm really curious. To me, this is not meant to be an insult, but it feels a little bit like, AI systems to help tutor math better is a little bit of the manure cleaning up. In the sense that there is a very strong sense of really old school education that those things help with. And so I'm just curious, honestly, if you think of 2030, are we still going to be really focused on AI systems to tutor students in math better? Or are the AI systems just going to help our students do those things, and they don't necessarily need all those core basic skills that we feel like is what math teaching is? And so it becomes much more applied to where they're headed with their careers. And I'm already getting, for instance, I had a conversation with our business department. They were really distraught because they realized that their accounting exams, which I thought were very hands-on, very project-based, could be done in the amount of time using AI. And then they realized that that's already what accountants in industry are doing. So I guess just the question is, to what extent do we actually need to be changing our curriculum and outcomes, the way we assess things, rather than nibbling at the edges of making our current system work better?
I'm not the math guy, but we do look at the big questions. The United States is unique in the world for being incapable of teaching math. And basically, this isn't a joke. I mean, you go across from Buffalo to Toronto or Vancouver to Seattle, same populations, way different scores. So the question's going to come up is, and I love math, and I think it should exist for those who really care about it. But if I'm going to do something, can I just get what I need to do it? That's the question. And so I think we have to look at that, and I think we're in a unique position in the United States to go to that next level, because we're not going to fix the problems. And even for everything that we're doing right now, we are hearing about, if you mathematically, statistically game it out, it's not going to work. Everything rests on a 3rd and 4th grade teacher to be able to comprehend fractions, decimals, and proportionality. And they don't. And so then you can't do algebra. If you can't do algebra, you can't go to the next level. So I think there should be several tracks moving. I mean, what we're hearing from them and what we're doing, those are great tracks. At the same time, I think there should be high-level thinking, looking at the jobs, the skills, and what's required, and thinking, again, if there's a digital innovation center here, I think we should be playing that game rather than trying to fix everybody, because it's really hard to fix everybody.
All right, go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, I think many of us have thoughts on this one. Maybe I'm crazy and not seeing the future. I think kids need still fundamental literacy and numeracy skills. They're going to continue to need those skills, unless we're going to hand everything over to the machines, which I think we've seen those movies. To be able to solve problems, you need to be able to reason in language, which writing helps teach you, and you need to be able to reason with numbers. And both of those things require some foundational skills, and I don't think we should be giving up on the need for those skills at this point and handing it all over. We said the same thing about calculators, we said the same thing about Google. We still need some of those pieces, and when I think about writing, we just launched a writing tool that helps give feedback on writing. But so maybe the skill isn't drafting from scratch, but you still need to know, hey, is this a good piece of writing? How do I put my voice in this writing? How do I make this writing, make sure that what I'm getting back is a good piece of writing? And all of that requires some knowledge of those skills. So I would push back on the idea that we don't need some of this.
I would add, though, that increasingly we need to keep teaching things like mathematics as if computers exist. because we're not doing that right now, and so we're all nipping around the edges, and that's going to change pretty fast. So absolutely, you need the basic numeracy and logic that comes with math, but the higher level math, it may not look like that you need calculus for this job because a computer can do the calculus. You need to understand the concepts, right? So that's going to be the directionality I think that we head. So I appreciate your comment.
I will say I agree. If we get stuck in fixing math, I'll dumb it down to that level. If we get stuck in that, we're going to miss so much opportunity for innovation. To me, the opportunities are to help identify, for help and learner, back to that learner agency. How can I understand how to map my future? How am I going to, I've taken 3 classes, I have these skills, I have this part-time job. I have no idea I have possibilities that are out there that truly are waiting for me. And how do we help advance the tooling so that it can present those kinds of opportunities? I think it's important to do all this work, but we have to extract out the understanding from the work so we can apply it to the big things.
Those are my answers, but I guess I should complete the panel and answer this one too. So I agree with all that. One, math hasn't been solved, right? So it's more than shovel and maneuver. It's like a great pastime to shovel that kind of maneuver. Be very proud of that. And the other thing is, the kind of research we're doing to create to automate the creation of these systems is potentially generalizable to other domains. We just started on that one because that's where you see the most tutoring, so we prepare for that. And then lastly, this is a panel on teaching and learning, and so much like the field of learning analytics, I sometimes struggle to talk about pathways, right, and choosing your direction and how your college pathway or your schooling pathway is a larger learning trajectory, right? So I think that should be in scope with the teaching and learning conversation. And AI absolutely can help with that kind of pathfinding, help with that freeing up and acknowledging prior learning so you're not duplicating credit. So you are, perhaps we still have standards, but having standards, a common goal, doesn't mean everyone gets to that gold standard.
A great example of this is, we've been using AI for proctoring, right? To catch people at cheating, to catch learners at cheating. And to me, it's a very basic use of AI. And so I think now the conversation should be more around how do I use AI to have more authentic assessments that don't require proctoring and that are not exploitable, right? So I think this is kind of where you're going, is how do we change our teaching? How do we become better teachers? And how can AI help us to do that rather than just using AI to perpetuate our existing pedagogy and practices that we've always had? That's a powerful kind of idea to leave with.
Yeah, how do we make it more equitable?
Yes, we are supposed to stop at 11:50. It is 11:50, but our panel is going to hang out here, so let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. And this is our inaugural Future Summit, so join me next year where I will have an entirely AI-generated panel. No, just kidding. All right, and please, we will hang out, so please interact and exchange information and ask additional questions. Thank you.